You threw it on the ground. Oh no, but where it is now, it's waiting to be found. But then last night I tried to call you. It rang once, then straight to voicemail. And my heart, it can't take this hurting. In the meantime, I'll be searching. I'm gonna keep on searching. I'll be waiting. Maybe I'll hear you say it. Oh yeah, I'll be waiting. I'm waiting for. I've always been so optimistic. See, I'd push through thin and thick. We used to risk it all, but now it's all down the drain. And we used to stay in our lane, but you left me with the pain and the shame. The shame of being some old fool. Oh, now what was the rule?
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to first of all say, Miigwech, thank you, Kenawea. Today is a good day. We're here today to talk to you a little bit about the workshop series about dance today. And we have a dancer here that's going to perform for us today. And what we're planning on doing with this workshop series is to take you through some of the areas and some of the needs that we have, in our industry. So we wanted to break down some of the barriers regarding dance, and also, showcase some of the opportunities that are available for dancing in the industry. So I'd like to turn things over to Deanne. I'll let her introduce herself, and look forward to having a good day today.
Ani Bojo, Nanukase, Nandishnakas, Chanto Donjaba, Name Dodem. Would you be able, could the host spotlight me, please? Yeah, I was asked to come and share my story of dance. And I'm going to share that after I open up this event with a dance. So I'm just going to flip my camera. And yeah, if you could start the music, Lindsay, Miigwech. I'm going to mute myself too. Do you need another minute for the music?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll share a little bit more. So I have been dancing since I was a small girl. I remember going to my very first powwow at the Fort William Gardens, and I must have been like 4 or 5 years old. And I remember holding my mom's hand walking into the arena and seeing like it was really bright and white, and inside there were drums in the middle and there were people dancing all around, and everyone was seated around. And I remember seeing this one woman and she was spinning, and to me she was like the most beautiful woman I had ever saw, and I was like, Mom, I want to learn to dance, teach me to dance. And my mom, she said, looked down at me and she said, I'm sorry, Deanne, I can't teach you that. I didn't learn that growing up. So my mom, she says, go follow behind those women and go do what they do. So me being that tiny little kid, I just followed those women around and I did what they did. And over time, the community in Thunder Bay, they like took me under their wing, and they taught me about the importance of our regalia and why they're sacred, how they're not costumes, and how when you put them on, like it's like you're asking for a life of minimal Botsuan, so you have to act in a good way and honor your sacred items when you wear them. So yeah, and I'll, Lindsay, are we good enough for music? Just give me what's that? A hoe? Oh, okay. So yeah, back when I was, and later on when I grew up, I learned like why my mom couldn't teach me to dance, and it was because my mom was a part of the 60s scoop. And not only that, like most of my grandparents went to Indian residential school. My grandmother from Temagami First Nations, she was sent all the way to Kenora for Indian residential school. And when she aged out of residential school, she just stayed there. That's where she met my grandpa. So the intergenerational trauma in my family, it was really tough. And growing up, like I didn't learn my language, and my mom, she held on to small amounts of culture, and she made sure to always teach that to me. And like the trauma that my mother experienced being a part of the 60s scoop, it really affected her ability to parent me. And my mother, she used drugs and alcohol to cope with her trauma. And of course, I don't blame her. Like, she was a part of a system that was meant to like oppress Indigenous people. And when I was living with my mom when I was little, like because of her addictions, I ended up being sent to foster care when I was really small. And because of my mom's negative experience in the foster care system, she didn't want that life for me. She didn't want that life and care for me. So she worked really hard, and she went to treatment, and she sobered up, and she got me back. And she got us back, but she still struggled with trauma. And because of her trauma, like we grew up really poor. Like we often didn't have money for clothes or for shoes or for jackets or nothing nice. I often remember I went to St. Anne's in Westport, and yeah, it was always a struggle. Like we would get like one peanut butter and jam sandwich for lunch, and if we were lucky, like we got an apple. And it was really hard, like growing up, living in poverty and not having enough. And then going to school with like a lot of non-Indigenous kids who had, from what I saw, like they had everything. They had gushers, they had like juice boxes, and I was like, so just seeing that over and over, like me having nothing and seeing people that had something, it was so hard for me. So one of the things that I did to cope was I started to shoplift when I was probably like maybe 12 years old, 12 or 11 years old. I started to shoplift, and I got away with it a couple times. And then of course I was just like a child shoplifting at the inner city mall. And then I got caught. And then I ended up getting sent to juvie. I was in the open custody, and like 80 to 90% of the kids in foster care were all Indigenous kids. And like none of the staff were Indigenous. I think there was like one Indigenous staff. And one of the things that they did for programming was they sent us to this circle called the New Experience Program. And it was at the Northwest Health Unit on Simpson. And when we went to this New Experience Program, it was run by Ron Konetsky, and he would have these circles, and like it was such a big group. There would be like 30 Indigenous teens that would come in and like watch Ron talk about culture and listen to him talk about sobriety. And this was now that I'm an adult, like that's an accomplishment, like getting 30 Indigenous teenagers to like listen for 2 hours straight, being respectful. Yeah, it was quite amazing. And I would always watch Ron, and he would talk about sobriety, and he would talk about Minabumadzowin. And to that point, I never knew that that was an option for me as an Indigenous kid. And I was like, I want that life. I don't like my life right now. Like I was poor, like I witnessed like addictions, and I was so little. And yeah, it really, I wanted better. And watching Ron talk about culture, it made me dream of a better life. And being that little girl watching those dancers, it made me dream of a better life. And Ron, he took me under his wing, and he one of the first ceremonies that he did with me, and with a bunch of us, he took us on a fasting ceremony, and we went up the Armstrong Highway towards Kapka River, and we did our Vision Quest, our fasting ceremony in the springtime. And it's when you give something up to get something. So we gave up food and water to get direction from Creator on like what to do with our lives. Like, what are we going to do? I think there was like 6 or 7 of us teenage kids that went. And it was in that ceremony where I got my colors and I got my dance style. And it was only because of like this Indigenous social worker who dedicated his life to working in Indigenous community. And he went back to his culture, and that helped him. And now me as an adult, I see like it's not as common to like have access to culture. Many people are just like me, where it was like I don't have access. I didn't grow up with access in my family. I grew up in trauma, and I grew up in poverty. And like I'm very fortunate. Like I survived. I was able to like grow up and make a good life for myself. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. So that greatly impacts like the work that I do. Like I teach power dancing and I teach regalia making because of the positive impact that culture had for me. Like I was able to dance through my hard teenage years. I was able to like move through my intergenerational trauma. I would put on my regalia and I would feel strong, and I felt beautiful. Like, and that was hard. Like as a Indigenous woman growing up in Thunder Bay, like I grew up thinking it was okay for non-Native people to throw things at me from moving vehicles. And I didn't think it was racism. So when I put my regalia on, I felt strong, and I felt like I could be okay. So when I would go and dance, I would think about like all of those challenging things that I lived through in my life because I'm Indigenous, because my mom's a 60 scoop survivor, because my grandparents went to residential school in war. And I would think about those things, and I would just like dance it out. And then every time, like my life got a little bit better. And I struggled with addictions from when I was 12 until I was like 24. Like 24, when I moved to Toronto, like that was when I was like, okay, like I think I'm okay. I can like make new friends. I can invest in myself. I can love myself, and I can choose something different. Because when I was younger, like you don't get a choice. You grow up in downtown Thunder Bay, and like your path's already laid out for you. Pipeline to prison, Like there was not a lot of support. Ron was the only support, and he was like a social worker who gave up most of his life to just like work front hand, like supporting and loving the community. And like he was like one of the main pillars. Him and his wife and his kids, like they were my main support. So yeah, just dancing is such an amazing gift from Creator. And yeah, we definitely, Indigenous kids need access to it, and Indigenous adults need access to it, because like so much kids like my mom or my grandparents or my siblings, like they don't get access to it because they're too busy just trying to survive. So like if we had more access to culture, more access to dance, like if we didn't have to worry about like how we're going to feed our kids, like life would be, yeah, we can start that healing process, community, like at a community level. So yeah, that's all I'll share for now. And the music is now ready. So I'll share with you guys a dance. I'm just gonna dance for 1 minute because I'm not in powwow shape. And I'll just flip the screen here. Okay, so I'm gonna mute myself, Lindsay, and then yeah, if you wanna put the music on. Yeah, Dave, I need a minute to breathe.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, just go ahead, take a break. I'm going to take over from here for you, and then we'll come back and we'll do some Q&A with the audience. So thanks, Deanne. Thank you so much. Great
Thanks
job.
for having me, Dave.
Always,
Thanks for watching, everyone.
So we want to, just say once again, thank you to Deanne for sharing her dance with us, and her fantastic story about her journey as a dancer. And I think that's very relevant to many different First Nation communities, and also to many different, dancers that are relevant today, that have taken dance to many different forms. They've taken dance from a traditional format to, a studio, and to theater, and to different kinds of production, and to dance videos, and to modern day storytelling. So dance is so relevant in our culture, and it's very important. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was to do a little bit of backstory about the history of dance with First Nations. And dance has always been a very important part of our history, an important part of our identity as people. The Canadian government, through the Indian Act of 1885, they banned dancing. They banned the traditional potluck. They banned sun dancing, which is a dance for life, which is a dance for a good life, praying for our ancestors and praying for our children and our future generations. So those were significant parts of our heritage, part of our culture and ourselves as beings that they had taken from us. So a lot of this stuff that happened, as a result of the, banning of traditional dance, this is powwow music. This is how many different First Nation communities celebrated their life. This was banned, and you could go to jail, for this, for up to 6 months in jail. And they even ramped this up more in 1922, up to 1927, when they banned all forms of dancing and all forms of regalia, all forms of traditional clothing. They didn't want you to wear, your bonnets any longer, or your long dresses, or they didn't want you to wear, your traditional clothing, or ceremonial clothing. If you were caught with that on, they would rip it off you. They would throw you in jail. Many people died as a result of this. Many traditional people that continued to practice this lifestyle, they had to go what they say underground. They had to hide, this dance. They had to hide these songs. So this was done. This was done in a very thought out way. A residential school, like Deanne had touched on, was very significant in many of our elders before us, and many of our grandparents and great grandparents that were affected by residential school, and how they were taken from their homes. They were taken, and they were all the young children, all the young people were taken. And so that they would lose connection with their family, they would lose connection with their community and their traditions and their culture and their language. So all of these things are very important to a First Nations person. And this continued right up into residential school. I think the last one was closed, like even in the 80s, the last one was closed. And the 60s scoop happened, which again took away young children right from birth. Like they were born into this. They were taken, they were auctioned off, to non-native families and to churches. They were given to churches as gifts. And these children went all over the world. They were everywhere. And again, that's a disconnection with history and their dance and singing and song and stories and heritage and language. All these things were taken. And it was through a lot of perseverance, I have to say, of First Nations people. The story of the jingle dress is a story of healing, because influenza, when it came through North America, it wiped out hundreds and thousands of people. And First Nations were no different. And this was one of the dances that were thought of as being a healing dance that would bring the people back. And one of the stories originate from Whitefish Bay, Ontario, where a young girl had been very, very sick. And it was her grandfather had a vision about this dress that she had to wear in order to be healed, and it was the jingle dress. So they helped her, walk the first time around, and then she gathered the strength to dance, and then as she danced, she got better. And so other people supported her, and this is kind of a vision that kind of took place at that time, in that time. The other tribes adopted that dance as well, and they had a similar vision, similar dream. So Whitefish Bay was one of the communities that really were very prevalent in the jingle dress dance. And to that dance there was ceremony, and to that dance there was song. And those are songs and teachings that are still taught to this day, that have been saved. And this is all during a time when First Nations dance was banned. If they were caught, they would go to jail. It didn't matter if you were an adult or if you were a child. This is what would happen. So they're very savvy. They're very brilliant people in order to keep this hidden. And as time went along, we go into the 60s and 70s when dance started coming back. They lifted the ban of dancing in 1952. So this is still in our lifetime, our present lifetime, that many of our family members were affected by this. It's relevant to this day that dance is still, as long as it's an old style dance, it's something that was, underground. It was very much something that we had to fight for. And so dances started coming back. They started coming back in the 60s and 70s. And at that time when dancing was coming back, it was only the adults that would dance, because there were no children that understood the dance. There were very rarely children that had not been affected by this dance. So this was a teaching time where lots of our culture, lots of our traditions were being brought back to us. And dance was how these teachings came about. And everything that's tied to this. They say in our language, in the Anishinaabe, they say Nimigat, which means you dance with a purpose. So, often when I was young, like in the 80s when I went to start going to powwows, that's what they used to tell us, that you have to go out there and dance with a purpose. You can't just go out there and dance and fling your arms around and do, spin around and do nothing. There has to be a story, there has to be something to it. So it's very important that we were able to do this, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I had growing up with Dr. Richard Lyons and the Lions Dance Group. And they introduced me to dance, and they introduced us to different forms of dancing, and also like the Métis, for example. They shared their stories about their dance, where they were very much like First Nations were. In fact, they were even poorer than First Nations were. And they used to dance in their houses, and they had their own fiddle music, they had their own beats, and their dance is very stationary. The top part of their body doesn't move, just their feet move. And the story behind that is that because the Indian agents used to come into the reserves and look at the houses. And if they saw you dancing, they would come to your house and they would stop you from dancing or throw you in jail. So this is how they did this. It just looked like they're just standing around or walking around. And that's how they passed on their stories and their traditions. So, as dance started developing, we started seeing a big push for entertainment. Like powwow started growing. Like in the 80s, my story about dance goes back to I used to be in the house. And then went from being in the house to being in a hall, maybe the band hall. And then it went into, it became other things. It became, like into the entertainment halls. It became like the city halls or whatever. Then we moved into the arenas, like in the 90s. I can honestly say that Paulo started going into large arenas, and then they started having outdoor events, like in the 2000s. Like you can say, National Aboriginal Day was one of the events that had an outdoor event that had an outdoor powwow. Until then we weren't really had those. In First Nations communities, the powwow grounds became the centerpiece of the community, of the dance, of the drum, of the songs, of the stories. And often, it's still today, it's still like that, where that's where all the storytelling takes place. So a lot of the dance and a lot of the new things that are taking place, it's all still very, very new to First Nations people. Like it's an old story, it's an old way, but it's also very much a new living, a new lifestyle, like having funding for First Nations people to dance. When we were growing up, it was unheard of. We never saw that. I think Richard Lyons was one of the first ones that I knew. That he went to England, and he went to Wales, and he went to, as a dance group. And I remember him saying that, they felt like the Beatles when they went over there because people were just freaking out on them. Like here's some real Native people walking around England. And they wouldn't perform at all these huge, massive halls, which is crazy. And then they did, some other large performances for Canada on their behalf, 1967, and they're huge. And now you see how it's developed, like how dance has developed to, it's a way of storytelling. It has tradition, it has culture now. Many of the new generations that are growing into this dance and this living is that the stories and the history and the language is all attached to that. And it's important that they understand that. So, often when I'm asked to do dance presentations and asked to do or organize these events, that's what I keep in mind, is the stories and the history of it. So the one thing I did really want to talk to you about as well was about the funding barriers that are in the North and some of the funding issues that they have about, for many First Nations, their chief and council, when they elect during their elections, is that their terms are different than other terms. They have elections every 2 years. They elect a chief maybe for 4. Again, a lot of the turnover is high, and there's barriers for them to be able to get funding, authorization to get funding for these communities. And that's something that's very significant, because this is why we don't see a lot of people apply for that. And we're starting to see a change now. I'm starting to see a lot of changes with it opening up to ad hoc groups and nonprofit groups and collective groups. Where you're able to apply for this funding without having to ask for permission to do this. So those are things that have just recently happened. So I'm very happy with those kind of things. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about those kind of things, like what are some of the questions that you might have about dance? What are some questions that you might have about barriers that you've come across? And I think we'll just leave it at that for now. If you have any questions, or if there's anything that you'd like to ask Deanne or I, like we're more than we're more than excited to sit down and listen to you, or if you have a story to share, something that's in common with what we've gone through, as dancers or as performers or as organizers. Deanne is funny because she talks about the Fort William Gardens as being one of her first experiences, and I can remember when we got the Fort William Gardens, like that costs a lot of money to get in there. And, we had all these boards we had to flip over, and, they never had a power in there before. And, like the sound was crazy. It was terrible in there, but it was fun. And, so much work goes into organizing events, and it's still like that today. So, my hats are off to anybody that organizes, dance specials and all that new technology with dance. I see it with, what was that guy there, DJ Shub, like he has some calling out the dancers with a great video about dance, and so I'm looking forward to seeing where all the dance goes to, and especially for Northern Ontario, because we have so much talent up here. And it's just a matter of time before it really starts taking off here. So I think we'll leave things up to if Deanne wants to add anything else to this.
Yeah, I wanted to add something about chief and council. So what many people don't understand is that there's around 650 different reserves across Canada, and all of them are governed by the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs. People always think and blame chief and council for them not funding this or them not funding that. But what people don't understand is that the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs decides how the money is going to be spent on reserve. And the reserve, if the reserve has to spend the money the way that Indigenous Affairs decides. And if they don't, if they decide we're not going to do that, we're going to do this, then they get withheld funding, ongoing. So chief and council, they're just chief and council is an extension of Indian Affairs. They can only work within the Indian Act. And the Indian Act has many, many clauses that control how we govern our communities. And I think what a lot of people also don't really talk about is the reason why Indigenous communities are poor is because we had our land taken from us. And Canada right now has control of 99.8% of land. And Indigenous people, we have 0.2%. So we are systemically impoverished, and we're systemically dependent on Indigenous affairs for the small amount of funding to support Indigenous communities. So lots of people like me, I'm pushed off reserve. My reserve is 1 mile by 1 mile, and my reserve cannot grow. It is not allowed to grow legally. We can't build 1 meter outside of our 1 mile by 1 mile. It's against the law. And people don't acknowledge that. And people just think get a job, buy a house, do something. But it's we can't. Canada is literally giving away the resources to non-Indigenous businesses for free, and they make the money, and they take the money. They use it to build their cities. They use it to make people rich, but we don't benefit from any of that. We're just systemically oppressed, and we're still being coerced from the government to sign away our land. That's what modern day treaties are. And the only way we can enter into a modern day treaty is if we agree to extinguish our rights to our own land. And many communities they don't want to do that. So there's we're not even going to negotiate because this is not a negotiation. So, but it's really tough because some reserves, they're starving, they don't have clean drinking water. People are dying, so people are literally starved into signing these agreements. And it's systemic racism, and we're still living through it. So, yeah, I just wanted to add that. I went to school for Indigenous governance. Because I was why is my community so, I thought it was normal, Indigenous people, we're just dysfunctional. And then the more I learned, the more I got older, I was it's not our fault. It's not our fault. There's this bigger system at play, and we're at the bottom. So yeah. So I try to do my best. So I'm well, what can I do with my life to support my community? I'm well, I'll teach dance, and I'll teach regalia making, because at least I'm putting something good. I'm doing something good, and yeah. My rant.
Thanks, Diane. Okay, one of the questions that we got here was what sort of successful routes can you identify for dancers that might not be known? So I wanted to, there are a lot of different avenues for people to find successful routes for a dancer. So just to give you an example, it's like dance groups or dance troupes that go into schools that do education programs. There's an opportunity for funding there, to go in as an educator. There's also opportunities for, when you do videos, like Deanne does some how-to dance videos. I think she had, 500,000 hits or something on one of her videos. Like, it's a crazy amount, high number, it's crazy. And the other one was, there's a number of different ways to, with dancing, because you can collaborate with different kind of dance groups or different kinds of dancers. And to give you an example of that is that, for example, we did an orchestra piece here in Thunder Bay, and we had a traditional dancer perform, in front of an audience. So we took the traditional beat of, what we're doing, and then we combined it with the symphony, and then that's what he danced to. So there are opportunities for collaborating and, taking our dance to a different level. There's also commercialism, like right now here in Thunder Bay, they're doing this virtual gathering of, where they're asking for dancers to come and tell stories, and to showcase their dancing. And we're seeing this with virtual powwows now. But you're also starting to see a lot of the opportunity for people to share different stories about dancing. Like it's not everybody came to the same route about dancing. Some of the traditional dancers, their stories are much different. There's many different tribes, and there's many different teachings behind each of the dancers. So there's a lots of opportunity for that. So like in terms of education, that's a great avenue to take. And, even for commercialism or like collaborations like Classic Roots, he's gone off to Europe. He's been to Germany and to Japan and wherever else he's been to. And even my uncle Paul, he traveled with a group called Eagle and Hawk. He went all over Europe. He went to Germany, he went to all these great places. He saw Germans having powwows, which I thought that was crazy. Like that was, for him, he came back with all this German money. He was like, you gotta do this stuff. So, there's lots of opportunity for traveling like outside our own boundaries, like outside our own territory. So I do encourage people to go and find out, like the best way to learn and the best way to do things is just jump in, get involved, find out.
Yeah, one of the huge events that I was able to participate in is in 2010. They've recruited 300 Indigenous dancers from across Canada for the 2011 or 2010 Olympics. So they had like 300 natives between the age of 18 and 30, and they from all parts of Canada, and they flew us all to Vancouver, and we rehearsed for 2 weeks in that dome, and then we participated in the opening ceremonies. And it was really fun. Like we had a dress rehearsal one night, and we were with all of the athletes in the opening ceremonies. So we all had to get in our regalias, and as we're in regalia, we see all the Olympic athletes, and we're all like taking pictures of the Olympic athletes. And then the Olympic athletes are like taking pictures of us. And then we got to dance with Nelly Furtado and Bon Jovi. And yeah, it was a beautiful experience. It was kind of cheesy though, because like they put that guy and they put Nelly Furtado on this drum that came up from the floor. And it's like, we don't dance on the drum. Like that's disrespectful. But it was like they hired us as the dancers, but all of the people that came up with it were all like non-Indigenous people. So yeah, so like we were the face of the program, but there are still not enough Indigenous people at higher level areas like that are going to do the thoughtful planning in a respectful way. Because like, yeah, it was kind of cheesy, but it was still good. Okay. Yeah, I have gotten, I got a question here. I have gotten government funding for, actually how I learned to hoop dance. I learned to hoop dance by applying through the Ontario Arts Council. And one of the barriers applying for that money, I was successful, and I was successful because of my YouTube video. They're like, I don't know what you were saying in your application, but the video was great, so we're gonna give you your money. And I was able to like go and fly and work with Sandra Lamouche, or not Sandra Lamouche, Sandra Yellowhorn from Alberta. Oh, sorry. The question. So the question is, have you previously applied for government grant funding for your dancing or sewing project? And if so, what was your experience? So yeah, that was the grant that I applied for, was for, I think it was like an Indigenous dance, because the Ontario Arts Council does have like a branch for Indigenous dancing and teaching in the schools. I never applied for the teaching in the schools, but I did apply for one of the dancing ones. And yeah, the biggest barrier was like grant writing. So like I went to grade 10, I think grade 10 or grade 11. I have 10 credits from high school. So like I really needed support with writing English and like the planning of the grant. And then how I got it was, again, what I said before, like from my successful YouTube video. They're like, you're a good teacher, we'll just support you. So that's how I learned to hoop dance. And I haven't hoop danced since I had my daughter. She's 4 now. And, but I still teach it I have a power dance class and I teach it to kids. So I teach the kids about the history of the stories. I think and then I got a grant from the Ontario Arts Council for a mentorship program. So I worked with a non-Indigenous artist teacher and from the Royal Conservatory of Toronto. And she supported, her name was Nicole Fugere, and she taught me how to tell stories, and she taught me how to teach kids through the arts and through movement. And because before that, she taught me how to write lesson plans. And that was like one of the pivotal grants that really helped me in my career. So from that experience, like I'm now comfortable telling stories on camera or in schools or in front of like 400 kids. I can go and tell these same stories. And yeah, and it was through that mentorship with Nicole, who's amazing. She's like the sweetest lady. But I only had that experience because I moved to Toronto and I live like downtown Toronto. So that wouldn't be afforded to a little niche kid living in Sulakaut or in a flying community. So yeah, like we need to like support people to like build on their skills so that they can grow and reach their potential, so they just don't have to be in survival mode for their whole life. I saw one more question. I'll read it out. How would you suggest someone start their connection to traditional dance ceremony for color, style, instruction if they are in an urban or off-reserve setting? So I did my fasting ceremony when I was an urban kid in Thunder Bay, guided by Ron Konetsky. And then when I moved to Southern Ontario, they do berry fasts. So one of the traditions of the people in the South, they do a berry fast but that's only for women. I don't know what they do for boys. So the women will give up berries for 1 year and like they do that ceremony. That could be one way. One way, I had a teacher named Rita, I had like a social worker named Rita. I can't remember her last name when I was young and troubled. And the teaching she gave me was, she said, every morning take a small amount of tobacco and water, same on water and some food, and just like give an offering to creation and just put it out by a tree or put it out by water and offer a prayer that you want to start dancing and you want your colors, and it's like, what direction should you take? And just put that out there every day. Because like our culture, like sometimes things happen and you don't know why, or you don't know how. They're unexplainable. So sometimes those your style will come to you in one way or another. You don't know how, I don't know how, but you'll find out. And yeah, and then it's just like having the bravery to take a risk and get out there, because like it's really hard dancing at a powwow because people are literally staring at you, and like it's nerve-wracking. So what I usually do, like I wear glasses, I just take them off and then I can't see anyone. And then I'll keep my head up and then I'll look at the ground. And I'll be like, don't think about people looking at you, because like, yeah, it's nerve-wracking. But the more you do it, the more you'll get used to it. And then I really love what you said, Dave, about dancing with a purpose. And like, go out there with a purpose. Like, go out there and like dance for people you love. Go and dance for the land, and go think about those hard things and like just move through them. Because like when they blow that whistle, like that's when you can pray. Like pray, dance and pray. Think about your goals. Think about the life that you want. So yeah. I don't know if there's any more questions. I'll check here. Who funds these? What's successful? In terms of funding, who funds these? What successful reroutes do you find to fund these collaborations and projects? I know there's the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Arts Council. There's some private funders, like I was successful in the Harbinger Foundation. They fund Indigenous, like they do small grants for Indigenous projects, and they specifically support on reserve. So if you're up north and you're looking to garden, start a garden, like the Harbinger Foundation is really good. Like they're a private organization, so you could just Google Harbinger, Harbinger Foundation, and then that's a good one. I know my friend Mariah King, she was successful in getting a Loblaws grant, and it was like multi-year funding. Like that one was good. And my husband got the Laidlaw one before too, for multiple year funding for his youth council, or for a youth council he was a part of in Toronto. And yeah, I think that's about all I know. I know the friendship centers do their programming, and Mashkiki does, like they do a lot of culture programming. And I went to schools for like 10 years, and I taught dance in schools, and it was challenging. It was draining. Sometimes like grade 1 kids would be racist to me. They would tell me I look like a drunk Indian. Like a grade 1 kid. It's like, where are you hearing this from? Like obviously it's not, you just didn't come up with it on your own. Or the teachers would be like, are you a full-blooded Indian? And I'd be like, no. And they'd be like, well, you sound like a full-blooded Indian. And I'd be like, what does that even mean? So it was very draining, emotionally draining, teaching non-Indigenous people about our culture, because they have their own ideas about what our culture is and who we should be, and if we don't fit into their box, then they say the darndest things. And yeah, so now, like, it gets too much for me, and every couple of years I'm like, I'm not working in non-Indigenous communities for the next couple of years until I feel good. Like I'm going to focus on working in empowering Indigenous people and creating spaces for them, because like that's where my heart is, and it is needed for non-Indigenous people to learn about our culture. But yeah, it's emotionally draining being a frontline worker. Like you face a lot of hostility, and it's like so funny. Like humans, we know when people don't like us. We have intuition, and I can tell by the way you look at me and by the way you talk to me if you don't like me, or if you're judging me. Like I can walk into a store and I'll just be like, this staff is like, they're following me. It's like I'm a brown woman. They think I'm gonna steal. I got another question here. What is inspiration for you right now? So my inspiration is like, what inspires me? I don't know, what inspires you, Dave?
I guess some of my inspiration would come from like a lot, like I was very fortunate, I gotta say, like growing up with the likes of Dr. Richard Lyons and being introduced to so many of the very old school singers, like the Porcupine Singers, and knowing firsthand who Floyd Westerman was, for example. You know, went into theater, went into because he was a singer-songwriter when I first met him, and then you know, like he was also a member of AIM, you know, and he was also an actor. And when I had met him, he had just finished doing that movie, Dances with Wolves, and it hadn't come out yet. And he was talking about the challenges of that, and you know, I was just lucky enough to sit down and talk with him. And so for myself, growing up with so much of this stuff was that you know, I was surrounded by that in every aspect of my life. Like when I first came back up to Thunder Bay when I was young. I had my family around me. Like my aunt was the very first person that met me when I came to Thunder Bay. And I didn't know who she was. She just came and grabbed me and hugged me. It's like, okay, you're home now. All right, let's get to work. And she got me into beadwork. She got me into leather work. She got me into dancing. She made my first regalia. You know, she got me into you know, learning singing, learning dancing. She encouraged, like push me. And I was receptive to all of that. So I was really fortunate in that way that I went to a cultural school on top of that. You know, so I had drum groups that came in and taught. We had elders from across Canada that came in and did teachings. And like, that was my whole life until I went to high school. And when I went to high school, it was like you know, I don't know who all these white kids are. Like, you know, like it was a complete culture shock for me because I was the only native kid in my school. And so those were some of the challenges I had, but I always had my roots with singing and dancing, and a lot of the inspiration that later came on was, you know, like, okay, maybe I'm one of the first generational dancers in my family, or one of the first generational singers in my family. Like before that, you know, it was maybe in the 40s or even in the 20s was the last time we had a family member that was involved in dancing or singing. You know, I have an uncle that's in David now, you know, like, but those were things that they were so sheltered and so hidden that we had to, you know, like even our own family didn't know. Like that's how secretive that we had to be about these things. So I learned as I grew with my family and as I grew with learning about dancing and singing. And I was so fortunate to be young, and I traveled all over the country. You know, by the time I was 19 years old, I had been absolutely to every biggest power in North America. I went to Gather the Nations. I went to White Swan, Washington, you know, up and down the West Coast, up and down the East Coast. So, you know, I was lucky, I was fortunate. You know, it's, and I used to have to travel long ways for gatherings, so it was very significant that so many people were in the same place that I was, where they just discovered their culture, they discovered their traditions, they discovered their stories, and everybody was sharing. I mean, like everybody. Like we just told stories to one another all the time. And, you know, we would go back to our communities and bring that home with us. So when I came back to Thunder Bay, powwows were, you know, just starting to grow. And, you know, I got into organizing powwows in 1992, you know, after my long tour. And then, you know, it was great. So we had a lot of really good times to, you know, share dancing and have people take part in dance. So I'm very happy about that part of my inspiration with dancing. All right. Okay, so we're going to have to wrap it up here. We're going to be running out of time here. So I'll let Deanne to say, you know, I want to say we wish to everybody for having us here today. And I'll let Deanne say the last words here today for us.
Yeah, Chimigoch for everyone who's watching. If anyone who is watching is an Indigenous or a teacher, or if you're looking to learn how to power dance, like I do have a YouTube channel. It's called How to Power Dance, and it's like YouTube /C/ How to Power Dance, and then I just have lots of tutorials and stories, just to make it accessible so people yeah, can just watch it on their own time. Yeah, and I really hope that if there's any Indigenous teenagers watching, like, aim for the top, like, keep working hard. It's going to be hard, but you know what? Choose your hard. Like, everything's hard. So it's like, be hard and push to be your best, and fall down, make mistakes, and then get back up and keep going. Because, like, the only way we're going to have a seat at the table is if we keep showing up and making space. Like, make some space for me at this table. So, yeah, keep working hard, kids, and miigwech for everyone who tuned in.
Oh, you left my heart wide open. You threw it on the ground. Oh no, but where it is now, it's waiting to be found. But then